Welcome back to the Sentinel.
Thank you very much.
I'm sure had sat down with you before, although I wasn't part of the discussion. But you have done this job before. You were on the council, I think, 4 terms total?
2004 to 2010. I lost in 2010, and then I came back in 2012 to 2014.
Right. And I'm going to start with something that seems like almost kind of a recent development, but I want to ask you whether it really is. The council's website, it states that among the duties of the members, executive councilors are the constituents' eyes and ears in Concord. They ensure the executive branch of state government is fiscally conservative and above reproach.
Fiscally conservative? It says that?
It does say that.
Oh, okay. All right.
Which I guess you could take as just being boilerplate in nature or loaded. But in any event, one of the current counselors has been particularly active in terms of being the eyes and ears of constituents, even to the point of responding to complaints about the Liquor Commission by personally investigating the issue before bringing it to others. What are your thoughts on being that active in the role?
I think that's appropriate. We are the eyes and ears. We're informal ombudsmen for the people in the state. I have certainly done my share of investigating, and I can give you an example, which I was just thinking of the other day. There was a contract to put this fake turf in the DCYF area at the Sununu Center. And I had, prior to this, done some research about fake turf and its deleterious effects on kids who play soccer on false turf. There's another name for the false turf, but that's what it is. And so I had done some research on it, and I did some more research as a result of this contract, and I was able to get the contract turned down because of my research. And I think the kids' health is better for it. I had read that some of this causes cancer in children that play soccer on these fields, and there's quite a bit of evidence to that effect. So I think it's appropriate at times to do our due diligence when it comes to contracts, and certainly when it comes to nominees to head up agencies, judicial nominees especially, and look into backgrounds. Certainly hear complaints from people about a particular contract. I don't know whether Andrew heard complaints about the liquor stores and decided to investigate the sales that were going to New York and Hennessy.
I think he said he was acting on a tip.
Oh, but, okay. All right.
Whether that was a formal complaint from someone or just information, I don't know.
Yeah.
Going along with that, when he was here, Councilor Verlinsky, he said that because at the moment he is one of, if not the highest ranking Democrat in state government, he felt that there's a duty for him or an obligation to use the position as a bully pulpit and speak out and educate people and kind of act in a way maybe that people don't think about executive counselors. And I wondered if you also felt that's something you would feel comfortable doing as well, saying, I'm an executive counselor, and you ought to know this, and kind of taking political stances in addition to simply looking at contracts and engaging that and the other, I guess what people see as the run-of-the-mill duties of the position.
Well, from what I know, and I don't know a lot about it, but I thought he was seeing whether something that was being done by the liquor store might have been illegal. selling selling a lot of stuff that's going out of state, a lot of liquor going out of state, and there might be something illegal about it. I don't know whether that would have been the issue that I would have picked up on, but certainly anything to do with children and youth. If I thought that there was something illegal going on, if I thought that the DCYF was not meeting its responsibility, certainly if I thought that the head of Health and Human Services, or the nominee to be the head of Health and Human Services, wasn't qualified because of something that he or she had said in the past about their feelings about children, I definitely would have brought that up, done some more research, talked to the other counselors about it. There was an instance where a Democratic governor nominated someone to be a marital master when I was on the council, and I had gotten some complaints, one from a judge, about this marital master, and because of that, and because I had done some research about this person's background and their beliefs, I was able to have the governor decide to nominate someone else. So I think it's important to do the research when you see that something might be illegal or might not be good for the state. I look at part of my job to assist the towns and businesses and the individuals in my district when they're having a problem with one government agency or another. And that's one of the jobs that I like the best, even though it isn't one of the major ones that are listed when we think about executive council. But as I go campaigning, hardly anyone knows what the executive council does or is supposed to do. I find the majority of my time spent, these are the three major duties of the council, but then we're also involved in the 10-year highway plan and pardons and, on and on and on, because people don't know. If you moved here from another state, you don't know what the council does. But even if you've been here, you know the House and the Senate, they rule on policy, they help make laws. The governor, we all know what he or she does. But this body that's peculiar to New Hampshire doesn't get the attention it deserves. I think the Keene Sentinel had said that in the past, that it doesn't get the attention it deserves for all the power it has.
Right.
Do you think that some of the executive councils over its history have taken advantage of the fact that there's this lack of understanding about what it is that you do, the scope of the job? And I'm wondering also, have you had instances where you've had to draw the line in the sand as to how far you would go so there wasn't a perception of being too political about your vetting of a contract or investigation or research you were doing?
Certainly I have made it a policy to not look at the political party, if I knew it, of someone who's nominated for judge or for agency head. I tried really hard to look at the qualifications that someone had, whether they had the correct judicial temperament, whether they believed in the mission of the agency they hope to lead, and that sort of thing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you've had experience where it's the work of any of the executive councils has been, they've crossed that line, it's been too politically charged, or they've gone beyond the scope of their duties, and it's become too political.
It's not supposed to be political.
Right.
This body is not
Right.
supposed to be political, and it never was. When I first joined the council in 2004, there were 4 Republicans and me. And they all helped me to get acclimated to the job. Most of our votes were nonpartisan. Most of them were 5-0. We had an open, we could talk to each other at meetings or even out of meetings, one-on-one or one-on-two. We tried not to get 3 of us together at one time. But we would be able to talk it out. And that has changed. It's always been that way as far as I can remember in the House and the Senate, but it never was that way in the council, and it is now. And one of the reasons I'm running is because I hope to bring back that voice. I suppose that when I started having public hearings on nominees to head up our agencies, some people might have thought that that was political. I started with someone who was very popular, Mr. Flynn, who was the head of
Safety.
Yeah, what, was it Steve Flynn? No, it was,
It was public safety, or was it?
yeah, it was
before?
public safety, yeah, and he had been there for years and years. And it had bothered me that we never had public hearings on nominees to head up these important agencies, so I started having them with him. And I guess some people might have thought that that was political. I didn't see it that way. And, you know, I think they're still having them now. And we've had judicial hearings since 1997, when I sponsored a bill along with other good people about having judicial hearings rather than the criteria for your judicial nomination being your friendship with the governor. You know, I think it sends a message that to the press and to the public who can come in and testify that you may be nominated by the governor, but you really work for us, and we don't want you to forget that. You're working for the people.
So I'm sure a lot of that politicizing of the council is somewhat a reflection of where society kind of is at this point, and people taking sides and trying to push in as many ways as they want. One of the things that has changed along the way since you first were on the council has been the districts, and the way they are districted now, it seems that most of the seats are unlikely to change party unless there's a really
I'm hoping
lot-
you're wrong about
and-
District 5.
Well, that may be one that could, but it seems that when they were redrawn, I think in 2000, after 2010, it was done in a way that almost ensures that at least a couple of them are going to stay Republican and one is likely to stay Democratic, and then there's a couple, and 5 maybe one, that could go however the electorate goes. And does that make it more important to you to make that kind of shift because the council has become more political in recent years, or?
Well, I think gerrymandering is a terrible thing. I think it's really bad for our country, and on a lesser scale, I think it's very bad for our state. In 2010, well, first of all, Keene and Nashua have been in the same executive council district for decades and maybe even 100 years. And because in 2010, because of my opponent and his Republican colleagues, they managed to redistrict District 5 to make it almost impossible for someone like me to win. And like you said, they made Councilor Volinsky's district so that he couldn't lose. And I think that's really bad. The districts did not have to be redistricted, at least the executive council districts didn't have to be redistricted in 2010 because of a population shift. They were redistricted for political reasons, and you're absolutely right. And that's wrong. And so I would like to, if I'm there, and if I happen to be there in 2020, I'd like an independent group to look at districting of our House seats and our Senate seats, especially our Senate seats and the council seats, and maybe get them back so that they aren't like that, so that one party does not have all the influence. And so I'm hoping, there were 2 years since I couldn't run in 2014 where we had good candidates on the Democratic side. The last time especially, Dan Weeks was running. And he could not win. And he was a good candidate with a lot of money. And he wasn't able to win. So I think it's really dangerous to have gerrymandering the way we have it in the state now.
I'm going to ask one more question on the partisanship issue, and then we'll get a little bit more to the nuts and bolts of what the council does. And that is one of the things that it's meant to do is be a check on the governor, the power of the governor. So you get to approve or not appointments and contracts and such. Is that something that you see as being overtly partisan at this point in how that's being done? Is if the person who's in the corner office has a majority of councilors from their party, then there's not really that check because they're going to go along? Yeah, I know you said it was more partisan when you first got on the council, but
It was less part.
or it was more bipartisan. I'm sorry.
Yes, it was. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it at this point, when clearly that has changed to some point, do you see that still being an effective check and balance?
I do, and certainly there were times when I didn't like a particular nominee of our governor, and when I was on the council it was John Lynch and then it was Maggie Hassan. So they were both Democrats and they would nominate. I think they nominated good people, and they nominated some Republicans and some Democrats. So I didn't see the partisanship back then. And I'm not as familiar now, except that I can tell you that the Commissioner of Education who was nominated and was approved 3-2, the two Democrats did not vote for this commissioner. I believe that was partisan. He would not have gotten my vote. Not necessarily because a Republican nominated him, but because I don't think he was qualified. And he might have gotten the 3 votes because the 3 people who voted for him were Republicans. But I try not to do that, even if it means that I'm making a bit of an enemy with our governor, and I can tell you I have done that by standing up and saying, I don't think this person is right, or can we do it this way instead of another way? So I try hard to just approach my job as the representative of the people and as a public servant rather than a political electee.
You mentioned the state's 10-year highway plan, transportation plan, and what we've seen is that items on the plan often actually end up being pushed to 15, 20 years out. What do you think needs to happen for the state to adequately deal with the infrastructure needs? And what is the council's role, if any, in ensuring that?
Council has a big role in that. So we vote on toll booths and whether to have toll booths, the cost of tolls rise. And the 10-year highway plan starts with us. We go out to our district and hold public hearings to see what people think are the needs for our infrastructure. And although it isn't a policy body, so we don't raise the gas tax. I can tell you it hasn't been raised since 1993. I probably voted for it when I was in the Senate in 1993, but I think that we don't have the money to adequately address our infrastructure needs, and I'm including rail in that as well, because I am a big rail supporter. Might not be as important over in this area, but over in the Nashua area, it is very important. So I think we need to, as a state, look at how we're going to get the money that we need to keep our roads and bridges safe. We had a commissioner when I first joined the council who, when someone asked him about, well, what about this bridge? And I think it probably was a red listed bridge. His answer was, drive fast and don't look back. And we have a lot of red listed bridges now. And pretty soon we're not going to be able to allow trucks to go over those bridges because the weight limit will be too high for our trucks.
So it sounds like, obviously you said the council is in charge of creating the plan, but does the council have a role in the solution that you're referring to, trying to find more money for that?
Well, we could raise the tolls, but those only go to our turnpike system. So you can't take that money, and as much as it's needed to do something else, you can't take it. To let's say there was a road in Keene, a state road in Keene that needed help. That would have to come from our gas tax and federal money.
When coming up with a 10-year plan, which the council does, is there a better way for it to do that so that what gets on the 10-year plan actually gets done within 10 years?
If you had more money, it would get done in 10 years.
So, but if there's not gonna be more money, then why put them on the plan?
It's a template for what needs to be done. So although it may be pushed out 15 or 18 years, the towns know that come that year, unless something bad happens, that bridge or that road is going to get repaved or fixed. And so I think it gives some assurance to the communities. I'd be willing to look at it. Do you have another way that you've thought about that?
I don't, I'm just trying to figure out how is it gonna be a realistic 10-year plan, I guess. And maybe it's just the nature of the beast that the council says this would be a great 10-year plan. Now, you governor, you legislature, go find some money for it. But it doesn't seem really to happen. So what assurance is there to the community in year 8 that something's gonna happen other than, well, somebody hadn't forgotten about us, but.
That's probably it. Yeah, and it does go to the House after us and then to the Senate. So by the time it gets back to the governor for his signature or her signature, it might have changed quite a bit.
Do you find that has been the history of it, that once the council has kind of given that up to the legislature, people start putting in what they think their constituents want, or pulling things out and moving it around so that it doesn't necessarily that closely resemble what you guys intended? Or
I like to follow the money and where it's going in my district and make sure that it doesn't get out unless it's for a really good reason. But I tell you, the road system in our state is very troublesome, and we need to come up with a better way to make sure that the 10-year highway plan is a 10-year plan, or we might as well call it the 15 or the 20-year highway plan. And along with that, we can't pave our way out of a situation like they're planning on widening the roads in my area from Nashua north to Bedford. It goes from 3 lanes to 2 lanes, back to 3 lanes, and every Friday afternoon you can't get north if you're starting out in Nashua going north, and you can't get south on Sunday afternoon. So they're spending a lot of money to do that, and I think that we ought to be looking at rail as an opportunity to change how we're looking at transportation and getting from one place to another. The Downeaster train, which runs from, now it's from Brunswick, they just expanded it north of Brunswick in Maine, down to Boston, has been an enormous success. And we could have that from Nashua to Lowell to Boston, or from the airport or Manchester to Lowell to Boston. We could have that, and that would be a way of limiting the cars that travel that road from Nashua or from Manchester to Boston every day and clog the roads. It used to take about 3/4 of an hour to an hour to get from our house right into downtown Boston. And now, if you go at the wrong time, it's going to take you about 2.5 hours to do it. And if there were a train, people would get on that train, and if it ran when people actually wanted to go, which I think it would eliminate a lot of that traffic. We now have bus service from, I think they have it from Manchester to Boston, down 93, and Nashua to Boston, and that has been a real boon. I take that regularly when I need to get into Boston or to the airport, and it's really helped a lot.
does that strike you as I know it's kind of going back and forth, the idea of rail along 93 corridor, and does that strike you as something that's gotten caught up in ideological battles, or are there valid reasons that people would be concerned, and so it hasn't moved forward, and that's something that you really needs to be debated in that way?
Yeah, it does need to be studied, something my opponent voted against back when when he was in there, and we had a chance to study this whole issue, because he decided, even though our Republican mayor begged him to please vote for this study, he decided that no, it was going to cost too much money, it wasn't needed. So I think he has politicized that, and certainly in Nashua, Republicans and Democrats are in favor of this. Our Chamber of Commerce raised $120,000 from their own group to fund this study. And we know that chambers of commerce are usually Republican in nature because they're businesses, although not always. But I think a lot of things have become political lately, just because our country is so polarized and people are angry and not willing to listen. And I mean, even I find myself falling into that every once in a while. You know, and I think we have a leader that encourages that and role models that. And so it gives permission to political people and other people who might not act out in that kind of a way. It gives them permission to do that. And I think that's very bad for our country.
Previously in the past, the council dealt with every contract over $10,000, and that has since been changed to $25,000. What do you think is the right threshold for contracts that the council should look at?
I was part of that group that changed it from 10,000 to, it used to be 2,500, and I think when I first joined, and then before that it was 1,000. So I think that $25,000 is a good threshold right now. Obviously, I spend a lot more time researching and trying to understand the multi-million-dollar contracts. But you know, when it's a smaller contract, and 25,000 might even be a touch low now. I'm not sure. I thought it was right when I was there in 2010 to 2012. So I don't know. I'd have to listen to the arguments.
When it comes to approving appointments for notaries and judgeships and commission members, I wonder if you might talk a little bit about how you inform yourself with those individuals when you don't know much about them, what goes into your decision-making process, and also specific to judge appointments, how do you size up the qualities of fairness and nonpartisanship?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's really important to have a judge who is going to be fair, follow the law, but be able to listen. And so during the public hearing, I ask questions about their background. I might want to know what they've done that they're most proud of. If they have any, if somebody were there talking negatively about them, what might they say? We get a lot of information because they fill out an enormous questionnaire. So I would read that questionnaire. And since judges are appointed to age 70, I want to be really careful with who I give my vote, my yay vote to. I want to make sure that they are going to judge fairly and are not going to be partisan for sure. If Judge Kavanaugh came before a public hearing in the Executive Council, and behaved the way he did before the Senate committee, I would not have voted for that individual. I would not have voted for him. I didn't find his judicial temperament such that he might be able to, you're smiling, such that he would be able to rule fairly and treat people fairly. Be able to understand how someone who might come from a very poor background but find themselves in court for one reason or another. I want our judges to understand how someone got into this position, what might have caused them to do whatever it is they did or not pay something that they should have. I want somebody who's going to rule with some empathy and follow the law, but not be blind to people's hardships. Same with agency heads. These people are appointed for 5 years mostly. And we want to know whether the individual is qualified to do this work, has ever done anything like it, what their background is, how they make decisions, whether I can tell from a public hearing whether someone is going to be a listener or going to be a talker and not be able to listen. And I think that is really important. For notaries and commissioner of deeds and justices of the peace, I talk to individuals who call me. I don't get any background information, but usually what I ask them is, why do you want to do this? And I'm not as careful. I'm not as, it doesn't take the time that a judicial nomination or an agency head would take. Or we vote on the public utilities commissioners as well. And I think it's important for a lot of questioning to go on. Also, sometimes they meet privately or have a discussion privately over the phone with a judicial nominee. But mostly what I say is, if they want to talk to me privately, that we can talk at the public hearing. And I'll usually ask them questions about how they feel about different issues, that sort of thing.
You mentioned the judicial restriction that they serve until age 70, and you also mentioned Judge Kavanaugh. So in the U.S. Supreme Court, they can serve. It's for life
Forever,
until
yeah.
they decide to retire or otherwise incapacitated. But in terms of age 70, we recently had a justice come up upon that and have to step down. Does that seem like a reasonable limit to set, or should it depend on the abilities of that justice? Or
So I think it's in our Constitution that you serve until age 70. I'm pretty sure it is. So I think it's too low. I think when our Constitution was written, 70 was really old. When I was young and my grandmother was 70, that was really old. I'm 70 now, and that's pretty young. So I would have to retire if I were, in the judiciary. So I know Linda Delanis did not want to retire, and Judge Conboy did not want to retire, and they were still good, and they were still had a lot to contribute. And I think they can be called back as retired justices if we need additional justices to sit. But if I were writing the Constitution now, I'd put it at a different age. And I don't know whether it would be 80 or 78 or, but it wouldn't be 70.
Recently, the council voted on whether to grant a pardon hearing for someone convicted of murder. Do you have any thoughts on that function of the council and how you would approach it?
Right. So I don't know too much about this part. It wasn't granted, was it?
No.
No. But when I was there, we had a pardon hearing for an individual from this area, from the Keene area. His name was Thomas Schoolcraft. Maybe some of you might remember him. He, as a teenager, did some really bad things. I think he robbed some houses over on the seacoast and in Massachusetts. And he ended up working for the Department of Corrections here at your county jail, right? And he was good, and he had the support of many people, including professors from Keene, where he went to school and got his degree. A lot of people supported him. I can't remember the name of the person. Rick
Van Winkler.
Rick Van Winkler was supporting him, and I got very involved with this. I made an acquaintance of him. I talked to him a lot about what he had done. We still communicate, even though this was years ago. And he wanted a job that would necessitate him carrying a handgun. He wanted to serve in some capacity, and he couldn't do that unless he got a pardon from the council. And it's interesting that Ray Burton and I, the oldest and longest serving people on the council at that time, voted to grant him a pardon after an extensive public hearing. And the three newer people on the council voted against the pardon hearing. And I can tell you that pardons ought to be rare, and they ought to be an act of executive grace, and someone really needs to earn the pardon. And I felt this individual did, and was very disappointed that he wasn't granted the pardon. But having said that, many pardon requests came to our council. One of them was from Pam Smart. And do you remember Pam Smart? Okay, Pam Smart was accused and convicted of murdering her husband in a real cruel fashion, or actually hiring 3 teenagers that she had a relationship with from her school over on the seacoast. And he was killed, she was convicted, and she was requesting a pardon. And that was turned down completely because none of us believed that she deserved a pardon. And I have not ever voted for any other pardon except for Thomas Schoolcraft. And I really thought he had earned it and deserved it.
So that's
He
Okay.
also requested a pardon in Massachusetts because some of the crimes he had committed were in Mass. And I went down to that pardon hearing and testified on his behalf in Massachusetts. I was so convinced that he deserved it.
So
Sorry.
what the council though is voting on is whether to grant a hearing, right? It's not, you're not saying we pardon you, that's.
I think we
up to
do
the-
grant after the hearing whether to pardon an individual. And I think the governor needs to join us. I think he can or she can veto a pardon, but if 3 of us vote to pardon someone and the governor agrees, I think that person receives a
So when
pardon.
somebody asks for a pardon hearing, you're actually voting on the pardon, not on whether to have them come before.
First, we
It's not
vote
a
on having
two-step.
a hearing.
Okay, because I
And-
think that's as far as it got in this latest case.
Oh,
It was for
okay.
a hearing.
There was a hearing, or there
No,
wasn't?
they
Oh,
voted
the vote was
not
whether
to
to
hold a
have a
hearing.
All right, yeah, and that's the way usually most of them are.
Okay.
Because what that person has done is so egregious that we're not willing to even have a pardon hearing.
Okay. Could be, so that's what I was thinking of in terms of this and wondering if there's a philosophical, if philosophically you would say, well, sure, you can have a hearing, but then you might still not get my support. But there are cases where you just wouldn't even,
Right.
you know,
And if the word
Go
got
for a
out
hearing.
that every person that applied for a hearing would have a hearing, we'd be doing nothing else but having pardon hearings. Because, when men and women are in jail, they don't have a lot to do with their time, and many of them are researching what has happened to them and requesting pardons,
Yeah.
pardon hearings.
so that's a pretty frequent request. Or?
I'd say that when I was on the council, we'd have maybe 1 to 3 a month requests. And we'd read all the background information, and the Attorney General's office would make a recommendation if the Attorney General's office prosecuted this individual. And I think that with Thomas Schoolcraft, I think the Attorney General's office either didn't take a position or they might have favored it, which made it all the more difficult for me.
So much of what the council does has an overarching goal of whether or not this is good for the state. And yet you represent a very specific district. So I'm curious about how you go about balancing the needs of what's good for the state and the needs of the district. And one example might be the commuter rail, which in the short term at least would affect more commuters along the I-93 corridor than people in the Monadnock region or in Keene. So how do you reconcile?
So the rail that I am supporting goes down Route 3 to Lowell. It doesn't go to 93. It would have to start in Manchester. So they're looking at having it come from Lowell to Nashua and go north to the airport and maybe Concord. So I look at that as being good for not only Nashua and the surrounding areas, but good for the state, because Nashua is an economic generator for the state. We raise a lot of money and we send it to the state. And this would be a way, I think, of having an enormous economic inducement to having companies move to New Hampshire. We certainly are an aging population. Young people would be willing perhaps to move to the state, to live on the rail line, maybe commute into Massachusetts, but live in New Hampshire because it's less expensive to buy a house in New Hampshire than it is in Massachusetts. So I see this as benefiting the state. So I would be supporting it as certainly a benefit to my area. And it's what people in my district really want. But I see it also as a benefit to the state. I'm trying to think of something that I might support for my area that might not be a benefit to the state. Certainly there are contracts that come up that benefit businesses in my communities. But I've never looked at it as, well, if I vote for this, then is less money going to the North Country? Because somebody's always done the vetting for the contract to get to us. But I'm trying to think of something
What about within the district itself? Do you recall where there was an issue that was of importance to Keene, and it might have butted up against interests of people in Nashua? Where do you go with that?
A better example would be Peterborough's. Keene's not in
Peterborough, that's right.
Peterborough's still in my district.
Yeah.
Although, I tell you, I love Keene, and I am going to be the honorary executive counselor in Keene if I'm elected. I mean, I used to come here all the time, stop in at your mayor's office, have lunch here on Fridays. Eddie Albert, who is a resident here, he's passed on now, but he used to have lunches every Friday at one of the restaurants, and I used to come over and visit with citizens who wanted to come, and it was great. So I'll be the second counselor here. I know Andrew Valinsky is the main counselor, and I see his signs on the road, so, and I don't see mine around here, so, so I know he's the real one, but I'm the honorary one, if I get in.
But even in terms of the rail project, it would be an economic driver for the Nashua area, and maybe as far north as Bedford or Manchester.
Or Concord.
Or Concord. So that might draw people to the state who want to live along this rail line so they can easily get into Boston. It might draw people from Keene or Berlin or who also see that convenience, and so people here might say, well, what is that for us? We're losing a business, or we're losing residents who want to go live on this rail line. So that could be one of those situations where, or in this case, I guess Peterborough or Ridge or someplace. So they might say, well, you're voting for this and it's going to benefit Nashua. Of course not here. So how do you, is that something where you just say, well, but I think it's the best thing for the state? Or sometimes when you get a look at different parts of the district, or look at your district versus another part of the state and say, well, I've got to make a choice here, and here's why I'm...
So every area of the state has its own needs, and by supporting rail, I don't think I'm not supporting Keene. If Keene had, I think there was a bridge, or the Hinsdale Bridge, or something. There was a bridge that needed repairing. Maybe it's still in the 10-year highway plan. I don't know. Is it still in the 10-year? Oh God. So. All right. So it really is a 15 or 20. But anyway. I didn't think that by supporting that bridge going into the 10-year plan, I was not supporting a bridge in Nashua that needed to be fixed. I'm not ever going back on rail. There isn't. I can't think of one thing that would stop me from supporting rail. But I don't look at it as, oh, I'm helping Nashua and I live there, so I'm helping that. I look at it as something that's really needed in terms of infrastructure for the state. And then I might be over in Keene, or I might be in Peterborough. They had a really dangerous road that needed help. I mean, they had a road where and it's still there, you could go down over an embankment into a river easily, and there was just a chain link fence holding, and it was a broken chain link fence, so it was wobbly. And I remember coming to Peterborough and trying to help them with that. And I never thought, if I do this, it's less for Hudson or less for Litchfield. And I wouldn't have a say in those contracts anyway. I might have a say in the 10-year highway plan, what got in and what came out. But I don't think I would put something for Nashua, because I live there, at the expense of, not helping another community in my district. Or sometimes there'd be health and human services contracts that help out the North Country because of the people who lived up there are not as healthy, there aren't as many doctors, and so we might be voting on a contract to encourage doctors to practice in an underutilized area and give them some help with their medical tuition. And I wouldn't be thinking, fewer doctors for Keene, or, we would look at each individual part of the state and look at the needs for that. And that counselor would represent that district as well. Ray Burton was perfect at that. Many of you, do you know Ray? You know Ray Burton, yeah. So, and he was everywhere. And he might have had 120 communities. There was not a meeting with 2 people up in that area, and he wasn't one of those people.
Something else occurs to me along these lines, but when you have contracts before you, say it's a construction contract that is for a couple $100,000, and that comes before the council, and the company from, well, I guess it doesn't really matter where from, but a company is proposed to get that contract. Do you, as a councilor, do you typically hear from other contractors saying, hey, don't give that to them, the state should have taken my bid, this guy's gonna do a crappy job? So is there that kind of stumping and lobbying
Not
going
that
on?
often. And that's one of the reasons I favor having as few no-bid contracts as we possibly can. Before I joined the council, these no-bid contracts were going through all the time, and another type of contract called a retroactive contract. So the no-bid contract is the agency decides, we like this company to do our work. We've done business with them before, we like them, we know they're good. We're going to give this contract to them for no other reason other than that. And so I made it clear when I first joined the council that those contracts would have an uphill battle to get my vote. And I voted against a lot of these no-bid contracts. So much so that the agency would call me before a no-bid contract was coming up and saying, here's why this is a no-bid contract. And there are some good reasons why you wouldn't have a contract that you put out to bid. But I think we're better off as a state in terms of finances if we send every contract that can go out to bid out. And the same with retroactive contracts. An agency would enter into a contract and then would say to the council, oh, by the way, we already entered into this contract, but we need your approval of it to pass. And that would happen a lot. And I'd ask a lot of questions about that. And
Is that something that's, as far as you understand, still happens?
I'm sure there are retroactive contracts that go through now. And sometimes it might be a timing issue. There might be a good reason for it. For example, you might not want to have a no-bid you might want to have a no-bid contract if it's for a tiny amount of money. It would cost a lot of money to put a contract out for bid. If it were, let's say, under $25,000, it would cost the agency more to put a contract out, get a proposal ready to put out, take the bids in, examine them, determine, grade them, that sort of thing. Also, if there's a weather hazard or a hurricane or something, and we needed a road fixed right away, you wouldn't want to have people wait to have a road open, while you're getting bids. Sometimes the federal government mandates what business or what group gets a contract, and if we want the federal money, this is the contracting agency that we need to accept. So there are sometimes reasons, but it ought to be the exception and not the rule.
Is there anything else that you think our readers or viewers want to know about your candidacy and how you'd approach the position?
Sure, I'd like them to vote for me. Yeah, for me, this is all about public service. I retired in 2014, and I was a good retiree. In my family, I got the relaxed gene. My brother and sister didn't get it. My parents certainly didn't get it, but I got it. And I was a good retiree. I traveled a little with my husband, who's still working and travels to really interesting places. I joined the board of the New Hampshire Women's Foundation. I did some reading. I babysat for my grandbabies, Ethan and Miles, who are living in Concord. And I was enjoying myself. And then what happened? Trump got elected. And I looked at this country, and my opponent is much like Trump. And I don't like bullies. And I don't like people who are not kind to other people. And I like people who are going to listen. And I decided that this is some small way that I can contribute to what I see going on in this country and in this state. I think we can hold fast to our beliefs and vote that way, but I think we need to be civil to each other, and I think we need to listen to each other. I think probably constituents don't mind if you don't agree with them, as long as they feel like they've been listened to and someone hasn't tried to shove something down their throat. And I have found that that's the way I go through life and the way I approach my jobs on either in the Senate or the House of Representatives or on the council.
Are you hopeful that our politics will be restored in terms of, in your candidate questionnaire, you noted that we had lost our constructive tone and that sense of civility. What makes you hopeful that will change?
Well, I'm going to get back there. It's going to change from my perspective. I am a real optimist. I always have been. But I can tell you this last year and a half has really tried my optimism. I've watched our elected leader embarrass people, mock people, make a laughingstock of our country to other countries. And I've looked at the kind of people who support this kind of behavior, and it has really taken me back. I'm not as optimistic as I once was. I can only do what I can do. And I can replace somebody who I don't think is the kind of person that I am in approaching issues and not being an ideologue. I think Mr. Wheeler probably is going to come over here, but there are lots of differences between how he approaches things and how I approach things, and our views on many of the things we're voting for, including issues having to do with guns, women's health issues, abuse and neglect issues of children, the train issue.
So you mentioned the train specifically, and you just touched on a couple of other areas, but are there specific votes that he's taken in his tenure as an executive council for the district that voters would understand would come out differently if they were to come before you?
Vote to kill the Planned Parenthood contract. It was 3-2 vote. If I had been there, it would have been 2-3 the other way. We would have been able to contract with Planned Parenthood. Certainly the rail is an issue that, although the largest community in his district has been pleading with him for rail and to vote to support it, he has not done that. Although you wouldn't think that guns are an issue on the council, certainly we don't make policies regarding the safe use of guns, domestic violence, prevention with guns. It does make a difference. Whenever there's a judicial nominee that comes before the council for a public hearing, David Wheeler might ask this person, what about the Second Amendment? Do you believe that we ought to be taking guns away from domestic violence accusers? Do you believe that parents who are accused of abusing their children ought to have guns in the house? And so if he gets an idea that someone does not support the Second Amendment and his idea of the Second Amendment, that person does not get his vote. He stopped a judge, a really good judge, from getting on the bench when he first started on the council, that I know of because I've talked to the judge. And this judge was following the law in taking away guns from domestic violence abusers, people who have been accused of domestic violence in the household. So it does make a difference.
And following up on that just a little bit, and flipping it around a bit, if a candidate for judgeship were in front of you as an executive counselor, would you, for instance, inquire as to how the judge felt about expanding or restricting abortion rights?
I wouldn't ask that. No, I wouldn't ask that. And I think it's an inappropriate question. I don't think that judges ought to be, or potential judges ought to be, telling anyone how they're going to rule on an issue that might come before their court. And I'm a gun owner. I'm a good shot. I inherited a gun from my father, and my brother and I own a bunch of antique guns. And so I went shooting probably a couple of years ago with a retired police officer in Merrimack. And he said, I'm not going to break into your house because you're a good shot. You know how to handle a gun. And I have had awards given to me by the NRA for my shooting ability. And yet the NRA gives me an F all the time. And I'm not complaining. I look at that as a badge of honor. But, they're not being accurate in terms of how they're looking at. Well, first of all, I don't believe the Second Amendment says what my opponent says it says. But, I don't think that because you, I'm sort of losing it here, but I don't think that people that have guns should get special treatment, and people that don't have guns should have their lives looked at in a particular way. I mean, who would think that I shoot a gun, right? Look at me, I'm a Democrat. That was really bad. If you don't want to print anything about that or do whatever you're doing about that, I mean, it sort of got off track.
Well, we appreciate you coming over.
Well, thank you very much for listening to me
seeing
and
us.
talking to me and asking hard questions.